Oh man, the clock is ticking. Just let those words sink in for a second. Those are the actual chilling final words of Captain Michael Davidson's distress call to an emergency operator. They really capture the absolute life or death stakes of the reality faced by an entire crew miles out at sea. You know, when the systems we trust fail us, time simply runs out. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're unpacking a really intense one: the sinking of the El Faro, anatomy of a preventable disaster. Okay, let's dive into this explainer. What makes this story so absolutely crucial for us to understand isn't just the sheer force of nature involved, but the cascading series of human, technological, and psychological failures that led a highly experienced crew straight into the eye of a monster storm. Starting off with Section 1, the disappearance of El Faro, anatomy of a disaster. Now, to really grasp this, you gotta understand the sheer scale of the El Faro. It was massive. A 790-foot roll-on, roll-off container carrier. I mean, we're talking longer than 2 football fields. Built of solid steel, she was 40 years old, a veteran ship that actually served as a bomb shelter during the Second Gulf War. She had 33 souls on board, a highly experienced crew who knew these waters like the back of their hands. When she sailed out of Jacksonville, Florida on September 29, 2015, headed for Puerto Rico, it was supposed to be just a routine milk run. But the terrifying reality here is that this colossal steel giant completely vanished. No trace. Moving to Section 2, recovering the black box, deep sea discovery. When a ship of this magnitude goes missing, you don't just write it off. Investigators had to pivot from a desperate high-risk search and rescue mission to an incredibly complex deep sea recovery operation. 15,000. That staggering number right there, that's the depth in feet where the wreck of the El Faro was finally discovered. That is almost 3 miles straight down into the ocean. To put that into perspective, down there in the pitch black, the water pressure is a crushing 3.5 tons per square inch. When the underwater cameras finally found her sitting upright in the mud, it was kind of like looking at a ghost ship. But investigators were hunting for one very specific piece of the wreckage. They were desperately searching for the voyage data recorder, the VDR, basically the ship's black box. And 6 months later, against all odds, they actually found it. This little device captured 26 hours of audio from 6 different microphones scattered across the bridge. It handed investigators the exact word-for-word transcript of the tragedy. So what we're about to look at is essentially the chilling screenplay of a disaster, a real-life horror movie where the crew's final hours are laid bare for us to study and hopefully learn from. Section 3, anatomy of a monster storm, Hurricane Joaquin. So the storm they encountered, named Joaquin, wasn't just some run-of-the-mill tropical depression. To figure out how a massive ship goes down, we first have to understand this totally unprecedented weather anomaly. Let's look at the timeline. At 7:39 a.m. on September 30th, it achieved hurricane status. By 10:49 p.m. that exact same day, it was already a Category 3 with winds over 115 miles per hour. And by 1:30 a.m. on October 1st, winds hit 120 miles per hour. Just look at the terrifying speed of that growth. In less than 24 hours, Joaquin mutated from a minimal hurricane into an absolute monster. And this brilliantly illustrates a phenomenon known as rapid intensification. This is exactly why both the meteorologists back on land and the crew out at sea were caught completely off guard. Joaquin was moving incredibly slowly over unusually warm ocean waters, so it was basically acting like a giant engine, just sucking up a massive, continuous supply of energy. It completely defied all the standard forecasting models. Which brings us to Section 4, a fatal data disconnect, 2 weather forecasts. So you have to ask yourself, why on earth did a highly experienced captain sail his crew straight into a rapidly intensifying hurricane? Well, the absolutely crucial point is this exact technological disconnect. Up on the bridge, the crew was receiving SAT-C reports. These were real-time updates printing loudly right there on the bridge, which the mates were actively plotting out on physical charts. But down in his private cabin, the captain was relying on a totally different program called BVS, Bon Voyage Systems. These BVS forecasts were emailed directly to him, and tragically, the data he was looking at was a full 6 hours out of date. He honestly thought he had a clear path to sneak around the storm. The crew, holding the real-time data up top, well, they knew otherwise. The VDR transcript captures this horrifying realization perfectly. Second mate Danielle Randolph, who, by the way, her colleagues described as an absolute spitfire, was plotting that real-time SAT-C data. Her reaction was immediate. Looks like the storm is coming right for us. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. The crew on the bridge knew exactly what they were heading into. They knew for a fact the storm was dead ahead. Danielle actually called Captain Davidson down in his cabin at 1:20 a.m. She was offering him a final chance to change course, maybe shelter behind some barrier islands. He totally dismissed her concerns, relying entirely on his outdated emails. When she hung up the phone, she turned to her colleague and delivered this line, just loaded with dark sarcasm. He said to run it. Hold on to your ass. They knew it was a fatal mistake, but they kept sailing. Why? That takes us to Section 5, the chain of command. Fatal hierarchies and human psychological failures. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't the crew just step in? To understand why an entire crew of seasoned professionals sailed into a hurricane without taking over the ship, we have to look past the technology. What's truly fascinating here is how this ties back to aviation history. There's a concept called crew resource management. It was developed in the 1970s after a United Airlines flight crashed in Oregon, simply because the flight engineer was too intimidated by the captain to clearly state that they were running out of fuel. It trains leaders to actively listen to subordinates. But maritime tradition? That's 10,000 years old. In maritime culture, the captain is the sole master after God. The crew of the Faro didn't mutiny to save their own lives because that rigid hierarchy was just too deeply ingrained. They followed orders straight into the abyss. Let's move on and see exactly how these cascading errors build into a physical disaster. By 4:30 a.m., they're sitting just 25 miles from the eye of the storm. First, water floods right into an open access hatch. They call it a scuttle down in hold 3. Second, 70-mile-per-hour winds push the ship into a severe 15-degree list or tilt. Because of that insane lean, step 3 happens. The engine's oil section pipe lifts completely out of the oil reserve. It just starts sucking air. And 4, the catastrophic result of all this is a complete loss of main propulsion. This massive steel giant is now literally deadweight, drifting completely powerless in a Category 4 hurricane. It's 6:48 a.m. The ship is violently leaning, taking on massive gulps of water, totally at the mercy of the elements. And the audio picks up this incredible moment. Second mate Danielle Randolph, facing certain death, leans right into her Spitfire personality and asks the bridge, "Coffee? Sugar's fine with the captain, right?" It's just a breathtaking moment of dark humor, a deeply human coping mechanism in the face of the unimaginable. But sadly, by 7:29 a.m., that humor is totally gone. The captain sounds the alarm to abandon ship. The final words captured by the black box are just agonizing. Able seaman Frank Ham, paralyzed by the tilts and the absolute terror, screams, "We're going down." Captain Davidson, finally realizing the gravity of his errors, stays right with him. "I'm not leaving you, let's go." Shortly after that exact exchange, the black box submerged under the rising water and went completely permanently silent. Section 6. A Legacy of the Lost, Moving Forward. Look, the Faro was a completely preventable disaster, but what actually came out of it? Well, out of immense grief came immense action. Frank Ham's wife, Rochelle, campaigned relentlessly. She took her pain and turned it into a massive fight for systemic change. In 2018, the Ham Alert Maritime Safety Act was signed into law. This legislation gives mariners a whistleblower button, a real way to anonymously report safety concerns directed to the Coast Guard. Because of Rochelle's incredible fight, no seaman should ever again have to choose between keeping their job and saving their own life. 33. That's the number of lives lost. It's a stark, devastating reminder of the ultimate cost of hierarchical silence and system failures. The Faro teaches us that relying on outdated data, ignoring real-time warnings from the front lines, and fostering a culture where subordinates are afraid to speak up, it can literally be fatal. As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a pretty provocative question to consider in our own lives and workplaces. How many other industries, companies, or even small teams are currently sailing toward their own disasters, simply because leadership has forgotten how to listen?